Good evening. I'm Marlowe, and this is Marlowe's Evening Radio. The studio window is open just a little tonight, and somewhere beyond it, a cart is moving over wet pavement. It is a small sound, but it suits the record on my desk. From the night archives, we have an account from an orc traffic officer in a medieval trade city of stone gates, old bridges, market carts, and many kinds of travelers. It concerns a calm patrol during a quiet harvest procession, when a bridge crossing became tangled by wagons, shadows, a misplaced goose, and the sleeping patience of something large beneath the water. The officer does not tell the story like a battle. To them, it was city work. A sash to wear, a painted staff to raise, a bridge to keep listening to, and people of many shapes simply trying to get where they needed to go. Here is the account. I wore the city sash across my left shoulder and carried the painted traffic staff in my right hand. The sash was yellow with a dark green edge, broad enough to be seen from the back of a hay cart, dull enough not to frighten horses, goats, pack lizards, or the smaller bridge birds that nested in the stone mouths of the drains. The staff was not a weapon. People outside the city often mistook it for one, perhaps because it was carried by an orc and because anything long in an orc's hand becomes a spear in a nervous imagination. But the staff had no blade, no iron point, no war mark. It had 3 painted bands near the top. Red for wait, blue for move, white for mind the crossing. Most of my work was done with the blue band. That is a good sign in a city. I was posted to the market gate and the old water bridge, where the lower road bent between the fish steps and the herb seller's wall. It was not the grandest post. The grandest post was the high gate, where visiting lords entered under banners and expected everyone to notice their horses. It was not the loudest post either. That was the East Livestock Yard, where goats argued with everyone and usually won. But the market gate was where the city showed its true shape. Everyone passed there, eventually. Human bakers with covered trays and flour on their sleeves. Dwarf masons with carts low to the ground and wheels thick as millstones. Elf healers with shaded baskets full of glass bottles. Goblin peddlers pushing clever little carts that folded and unfolded like beetle wings. Troll haulers taking 1 careful step for every 5 taken by the rest of us. Monks in gray sandals. Orchard folk with pears wrapped in straw. Half giants carrying barrels as if they were cups. Children leading geese, dogs, pigs, and once a very dignified sheep wearing a festival ribbon it clearly had not approved. A crossing officer learns the city by watching how people wait. Humans often shift from foot to foot, measuring delay in cooling bread or missed appointments. Dwarves settle their weight and listen to stone. Elves look for shadow first and road second. Goblins count openings faster than I can blink, then pretend they were not planning to take one. Trolls wait, best of all. When a troll waits, even the dust around their boots seems to understand patience. Orcs are not one thing, whatever travelers say. Some of us wait badly, some wait well. I had learned to wait because the road taught me. A crossing does not care how strong your arms are if you cannot hold them still. My patrol began in the usual way. I checked the chalk marks on the gate stones, where the morning route changes had been drawn before the city fully woke. I tightened the soft flags on the post beside the bridge. I made sure the bell covers were dry. I walked the old water bridge once, heel to toe, listening through my boots. The bridge answered low and even. Good stone sound. A little damp from the night air. No complaint yet. Below it, the canal moved slowly through its stone channel. The water was dark green under the bridge arch. You could see almost nothing there, except sometimes a bubble rising where no fish should have been large enough to make one. The water giants slept beneath that bridge. Not trapped, not guarding treasure, not waiting to pull anyone down, despite what children told one another when they wanted a reason to run. The giant had lived under the bridge longer than my post had existed, perhaps longer than the bridge itself in some form. The city engineer said the giant liked the weight of stone overhead and the steady push of water against its back. The fish seller said it hummed in winter. The night watch said it turned over when the moon was thin. I knew only that it disliked sharp bells, iron wheels striking unevenly, and anyone dropping barrels into the canal. That made the giant, like many workers I knew, sensitive to bad noise. I placed one hand on the bridge parapet and felt no troubled tremor. "Sleep well," I said quietly. The bridge gave no answer. The water gave one slow bubble. That was enough. By the time the sun had climbed over the tiled roofs, the market road had begun to fill. A human baker came first, pushing a warm cart that smelled of oat loaves, onion rolls, and sweet seed buns. The cart's cloth cover had been patched with blue linen. The baker gave me the little nod of someone who has crossed the same bridge every market day and still appreciates being seen. I raised the blue band and let the cart cross steady. Next came a dwarf mason with a cart of carved lintel stones, too heavy for the early flow. I held up the red band and pointed to the waiting bay. The mason sighed, but not angrily, then listened with one boot against the road and nodded. A pair of elf healers arrived behind them with a shaded hand cart. Pale cloth covered rows of stoppered bottles. One healer checked the angle of the sun, then the shadow under the herb seller's wall. I pointed them toward the shade lane 3 cart lengths ahead. A goblin tinkering family came next, their cart chiming softly with pans, hinges, little locks, bright spoons, and things I could not name. I raised the red band before the youngest could steer into a gap that did not belong to them. They gave me a wide, innocent look. I gave them the staff look. The cart stopped. That is also city work. No shouting, if a look will do. By then, the first banners of the Quiet Harvest procession had appeared beyond the outer road. Quiet Harvest is not a parade, though visitors often think it is. There are no trumpets, no mock battles, no ribbons thrown from upper windows. It is the first coming in of the mild crops. Root bundles, herb crates, small cheese wheels, seed sacks, winter pears, river onions, sleepy geese, late flowers, and carefully wrapped medicines from the high orchards. The old rule says the procession enters quietly so the market spirits are not startled and the animals do not forget their manners. The newer rule says quiet processions cause fewer accidents. Both are probably true. I took my place at the center stone where the road divided. Left to the bridge, right to the shade lane, straight to the holding square. I lifted the white band. Mind the crossing? The first wagon slowed. Hooves softened. Wheels creaked. A monk leading 2 donkeys lowered the bells on their harnesses with small wool covers. A half-giant orchard carrier shifted a basket of pears from one shoulder to the other, careful not to block the view of the child walking behind them. A pair of human farmers guided a cart of turnips painted with chalk symbols for blessing, sale, and soup. Everything was moving well. For a while, good work looks like nothing happening. Then the bridge tone changed. Not much, just a small unevenness under the road. A question in the stone. I turned my head toward the old water bridge. At the near end, the elf medicine cart had paused too close to the sunlit edge. Behind it, the baker had slowed because a goose was standing in front of the wheel. Beyond the baker, a troll-load cart was angling toward the bridge before I had called it forward. On the far side, the dwarf mason had left the waiting bay by half a wheel length, listening hard to the stones and frowning. The goose shook its head. A little bell at its neck gave a bright, sharp note. Under the bridge, the canal gave one large bubble. I lowered the blue band and raised the red. The whole crossing stilled. Not perfectly. Cities never still perfectly, but enough for me to hear the old water under the bridge begin to stir. The red band means wait. Most travelers know this. Some animals know it better than travelers do. When I raised the red band, the donkeys stopped at once. The half-giant orchard carrier stopped because the child behind them stopped. The goblin tinkering family stopped because I was looking at them. The human farmers stopped because their turnip cart had good brakes and because one of them had crossed my post before. The troll load cart did not stop quickly. That was not disobedience. A troll cart stops like a pond freezing, slowly, from the edges inward. The troll hauler leaned back against the harness bar, great shoulders settling, feet pressing into the road. The cart behind them carried barrels of root mash, sacks of winter grain, and 2 sleepy hens in a wicker box. Its wheels were taller than a human child and rimmed with leather to soften the sound. Even so, the road felt the weight. I held my staff steady. The cart rolled one more handspan, then another, then it stopped. The bridge gave a faint answering hum. not pain. Awareness. The elf medicine cart stood near the sunlit edge of the road. Its shade cloth had slipped on one corner, and thin glass bottles beneath it caught small pieces of light. The healer nearest the handle was keeping one hand over the exposed corner, making a shadow with long fingers. Behind them, the baker's cart steamed gently under its patched cover. In front of the baker's left wheel stood the goose. The goose had a narrow neck, flat orange feet, and the calm expression of an animal that believed the entire city had been arranged for its inspection. At its neck hung a tiny brass bell. The goblin child crouched 2 cart lengths away, hands out, trying very hard not to startle it. The bell shivered once. A clear little note. Too clear. Under the bridge, the water lifted against the stones. Not high. Not threatening. Only disturbed. I lowered my voice and asked whose goose it was. No one answered quickly. That was answer enough. The bird had escaped from somewhere in the harvest line and found the one place where every road needed it not to stand. I set the staff against my shoulder and took out one of the soft bell covers from my belt pouch. They were made of felt, shaped like little sleeping caps, with ties long enough for goat bells, mule bells, shrine bells, or once, a dancing spoon that had belonged to a magician and refused to stop announcing itself. I walked toward the goose. Not straight at it. Geese respect a direct line less than anyone. I curved around the baker's cart, keeping my hands visible and my steps heavy enough to be honest. The goose turned one eye toward me. Its bell moved but did not ring. I crouched, which took some folding. Orc knees are built for many things, but not always for looking polite to poultry. The goblin child went very still. The road went still with them. When the goose lowered its beak toward a seed caught between 2 stones, I slid the felt cover over the bell and tied it loosely. Not tight. Never tight around a neck. Just enough that if the bell moved, the sound would go to sleep before it left the brass. The goose considered this. It shook once. The bell made no bright sound. Only a muffled little sup. Under the bridge, the canal settled by half a breath. The goose now had a quiet bell, but it was still in the road. One problem solved. Not the crossing. I looked over the line again. The elf medicine cart needed shade. Its outer case had already caught enough sun. The baker needed passage before the bread cooled or softened under its own steam. The troll cart needed the bridge to itself, with no sudden starts. The dwarf stone cart needed to wait until the bridge had stopped carrying every other tremor. The goblin child needed a task clear enough to replace chasing. And under us, the water giant needed everyone to remember that sleeping beings deserve a city too. I raised the white band. Mind the crossing. Then I pointed the staff toward the shade lane, 2 cart lengths ahead. The medicine cart moved first, slowly, along the herb wall shadow. The healer kept the shade cloth low, and the bottles gave no dangerous flash. I held the baker with the red band until the medicine cart reached the far side. The troll hauler waited without complaint, because some travelers understand wait better than hurry. The dwarf mason kept one boot on the road and one hand near the stone cart, listening to the bridge in the old way. The goose took 3 steps toward the baker's wheel. The goblin child moved after it. I lowered one hand. The child stopped. The goose did not, but it slowed, and that was enough. I handed the child a small green flag from the bridge post and placed them beside the baker's rear wheel. A flag can turn worry into duty. The child held it with both hands, suddenly straighter. The goose watched the flag. The road waited. The medicine cart crossed. The bridge accepted the light wheels without complaint. The canal below settled another little measure. Good. The knot had not opened yet, but it had loosened. The medicine cart reached the far side of the bridge and settled beneath the awning of the herb seller's wall. One small problem had crossed safely. Several remained. That is the way of crossings. You do not solve the whole road at once. You move one wheel, then another. You listen between them. I held the red band up while the bridge grew quiet again. The baker waited behind the goose, both hands on the cart handle. Warmth rose from under the patched blue cover. The smell of oat loaves and onion rolls drifted through the road, making several travelers remember they had not eaten enough before leaving home. The goose took notice of the smell too. It stood very still in the baker's shadow, its felt-covered bell resting under its beak like a small gray beard. The goblin child stood beside the rear wheel, holding the green flag with both hands. A very official, quiet post. Behind them, the troll hauler waited with the heavy load cart. The troll's broad feet were planted in the dust, and both hands held the harness bar as gently as such large hands could. The cart creaked now and then, not moving, only remembering its own weight. Farther back, the dwarf mason had returned the stone cart to the waiting bay, though only just. The mason kept one boot against the road and one hand on the cart's side, listening to both bridge and load. The procession behind them gathered like water before a narrow channel. Human farmers with turnip carts. Orc shepherds with wool bundles. A pair of elf orchard keepers carrying pale fruit in shaded baskets. Let the old stones have one road at a time. The words traveled back through the crowd in softened versions. Heavy crossing. One road. Wait for blue. The troll hauler bowed their head. I raised the blue band. They began to move. Slowly. A troll cart does not cross a bridge. It becomes a conversation with it. First, the troll's left foot on the near stone. Then the right. Then the first wheel. The bridge answered low. Not alarm. Effort. The hauler leaned forward, not forcing, only offering steady motion. The barrels creaked. The sacks shifted and settled. The sleeping hens remained wiser than most citizens. I walked beside the cart, one hand near the wheel but not touching. Touching a heavy wheel at the wrong time is how a crossing officer loses useful fingers. The dwarf mason walked on the other side, head tilted, listening. The water under the bridge grew still. That was good. Still water meant the sleeper below was listening without rising. Halfway across, the troll hauler paused. Not because I signaled, because the bridge had spoken through the soles of their feet. The dwarf mason held one hand up. The procession held its breath, or the nearest version each species used. A gull landed on the far parapet. I gave it the staff look. It left. After a moment, the mason lowered their hand. I raised the blue band again. Step. Wheel. Step. Wheel. At last the cart reached the far side. The bridge gave a long, low settling sound. The troll hauler stepped clear and turned back, lowering their head toward the stones. Some travelers smiled quietly. I had thanked bridges before. I did not interrupt another worker doing the same. I lowered the blue band. The dwarf mason pressed a palm to the near stone, then nodded toward the waiting stone cart. Not yet. The stone cart could wait a little longer. The old water bridge, empty again, settled beneath us. The canal released one quiet bubble. The sleeper below did not wake. For the first time since the goose bell rang, the crossing sounded like a crossing again. Not clear yet, but returning to itself. The bridge had returned to itself, but I kept the red band raised. A crossing can look calm before it is ready. That is true of roads, animals, and people who have been embarrassed in public. The loose goose was back in the feather cart. The felt cover still rested over its bell, and through the slats I could see it turning its head as if inspecting the quality of its own rescue. The troll cart had cleared the far side. The elf medicine cart was in shade. The baker had reached the market slope. The dwarf mason remained beside me, listening to the old water bridge. The procession behind us was beginning to loosen. A few carts shifted. A mule stamped. A question moved from the back of the line toward the front, softening as it passed from person to person. Bridge listening. Goose recovered. Heavy cart passed. Wait for sash. Not perfect, but good enough. I walked to the near parapet and set my palm flat on the stone. The bridge was warm where sun touched it, cool where shade held under the edge. Beneath both, there was a low trembling. Not the bridge alone. Water. The giant had not woken, but it had turned, perhaps, or opened one slow eye in the dark channel below. I leaned over the parapet just far enough to see the canal. The water under the arch was deep green and almost still. A skin of floating leaves had gathered near one wall. A silver fish moved, then vanished. Beneath that, far down, something broad shifted the water without breaking it. The felt cover had quieted the goose, but the sharp note had already traveled through the bridge. Sometimes a problem is solved at the top and still takes time to stop echoing below. The procession still carried other sounds. Donkey bells, harness rings, charm chains, a monk's little prayer chime, the pans on the goblin tinkering cart. Even the baker's hanging oven hook could strike the cart frame if the road dipped. Sharp little sounds, each harmless by itself, together enough to keep the water below from settling. I turned to the nearest signal post and took down the long gray flag. The gray flag meant quiet crossing. Soft wheels, covered bells. Loose chains held. Voices low. Let sleepers sleep. I raised the gray flag above the red band. The crowd changed, not quickly, and not all at once. The monk nearest the bridge folded a cloth around the prayer chime hanging from their staff. The donkey handlers checked their harness bells. The goblin tinkering family began tucking pans into padded slots with the speed of people who had caused and survived similar instructions before. A half-giant lifted a rattling crate and held it against their chest instead. The sound of the road became rounder, softer at the edges. The water beneath the bridge stopped pushing against the stone so sharply. That was better. Not fixed. Better. In city work, better is often the bridge between trouble and peace. The dwarf mason knelt and placed both hands on the first bridge stone. I gave them room. Their beard brushed the road, their eyes closed, their shoulders lowered. Listening to stone takes more stillness than most people guess. When they stood again, they touched the bridge parapet, then gestured toward the foot travelers waiting in the side lane. Light feet before heavier wheels. That was sensible. Old structures, like old workers, sometimes do better when returned to routine gradually. There were foot travelers gathered near the side, 2 monks, a healer carrying a covered basket, a halfling candle family, and a pair of children leading a small goat cart with no load but flowers. They could cross before the next heavier wagon. If they kept to the center and no bells rang. I raised the blue band, but only halfway. Foot crossing. Center line. No stopping on the arch. The gesture was enough. The monks nodded. The halfling family gathered their candle trays. The goat cart's flowers trembled in the light breeze. The goat wore no bell. I appreciated the goat. The foot travelers crossed quietly. Their shoes and small wheels made the bridge sound like itself again. A soft pattern. A familiar weight. The water below gave one long sigh, or perhaps the current passed over a hidden stone. Either way, no bubble rose after it. The dwarf mason nodded once. The old water bridge had begun to settle. I lowered the staff and let the bridge rest. Behind us, the harvest procession waited with more patience now. When a crowd understands why it waits, the waiting changes shape. It becomes participation instead of delay. That is a crossing officer's hope, at least. The elf healer from the far side returned on foot and remained under the herb wall shade. The bottles were safe. One outer seal had warmed too much earlier, but no medicine had been lost. The baker, farther up the market slope, had lifted the cover of the bread cart just enough for steam to leave without taking the crust with it. The water beneath the bridge did not object. The gray flag moved in the breeze. The old stones cooled under my palm. The goosebell slept under felt. The water giant, I thought, had nearly settled. Not fully, but enough that we could continue if we kept the road gentle. I raised the white band again. Mind the crossing. Not as a warning this time. As a promise. The gray flag changed the crossing more than any shout would have. Its cloth moved slowly above the bridge post, plain and soft against the morning light. Travelers saw it and began making the small adjustments a city depends on. Bells were covered. Loose chains were gathered into hands. Cart boards were steadied with folded cloth. A monk rapped the last exposed chime. The goblin tinkering family tucked their pans into padded slots until their cart no longer sounded like a kitchen falling down a hill. The road did not become silent. A city road should not become silent. But the sharpness left it. That was enough for the water below. I stood at the center stone and looked over the line again. Not as a crowd this time. As separate needs. The elf medicine cart had already crossed and waited in shade, safe enough for now. Its glass bottles would need the herb wall until the market apothecary came to collect them. The baker had cleared the bridge and was letting the bread breathe under the cart cover, which was a delicate art. Too much air and the loaves cooled, too little and the crust softened. The baker's shoulders had lowered since crossing. The troll load cart stood beyond the bridge, heavy but finished with its part. The hauler had stepped aside so smaller carts could pass without feeling crowded by the great wheels. The feather cart had moved into the side lane. The loose goose was no longer loose. Its bell slept under felt. The goblin child walked near it with the seriousness of someone temporarily employed by the city and proud of the appointment. Still waiting near the bridge mouth was the dwarf stone cart. That cart could not be treated like an ordinary delay. It carried cut blocks for a well mouth, 6 pieces of pale river granite, each wrapped at the corners but still too heavy to pretend otherwise. The wheels were broad, the axle well greased, and the cart driver had the patient look of someone who trusted weight more than speed. The dwarf mason remained near the bridge stones, listening. I did not need many words from them. The angle of their boot, the set of their jaw, and the way their fingers rested against the parapet told me enough. The bridge was safe. The bridge was tired. Those can both be true. Behind the stone cart, the procession stretched back toward the market gate. Turnips, pears, onions, wool bundles, candle trays, herb baskets, small animals, folded cloth, cheese wheels, baskets of late flowers, humans, orcs, elves, goblins, dwarves, halflings, half-giants, monks, drovers, apprentices, and travelers whose people I did not know but whose carts still needed space. A crossing officer cannot love one road user more than another, but you can see what each one carries. The flowers could wait, if shaded. The onion cart could wait if the mule was kept calm. The candle trays needed no direct sun for long. The pear baskets needed gentle handling. The stone cart needed the bridge alone and rested. The road itself needed not to be rushed. I placed 3 soft flags along the ground, 1 blue at the center line, 1 gray at the near bridge mouth, 1 white in the side lane. The colors made a quiet sentence for the procession. Move here. Soften here. Wait there. Then I began returning the crossing to order. First came the Lightfoot travelers. They crossed in a thin line down the center seam, sandals and soft boots making familiar sounds on the old stones. A pair of halfling candlemakers held their trays level between them. A healer on foot kept a covered basket close to the chest. The goat cart with flowers followed at a slow roll, its wheels wrapped in cloth, its animal more interested in a weed near the parapet than in causing trouble. The bridge accepted them. The canal stayed low. Good. After them I brought forward the small produce carts. Pears first, then late flowers, then the turnip cart with the chalk marks. The turnip cart's rear wheel wanted to drift toward the edge, so I tapped the white band against the road and guided it back to the center without speaking. The driver corrected at once. Sometimes the staff says enough. The mule cart needed a pause. One ear had begun to flick toward the canal, catching some sound from below that the rest of us could not hear. I let the mule stand with its nose toward the herb wall. A half-giant orchard carrier shaded its eyes with one broad hand, blocking the sun from the animal's face. The mule settled. The cart moved. Then the road was ready for heavier choices. I went back to the bridge and set my palm on the parapet. A low tremor remained, but it was no longer nervous, more like an old worker after lifting a barrel, aware of itself, wanting a breath, not refusing the next task. The dwarf mason placed 1 small wedge stone near the first wheel line, not to hold the bridge, but to mark the clean track where the granite cart should roll. I placed a second marker at the far side. Together, the 2 stones made a path narrow enough for attention. The stone cart waited until the entire bridge was clear. No foot travelers, no animals, no curious child, no goose opinion. Only the cart, the driver, the mason, the bridge, and me. The gray flag stayed raised. The city behind us became very nearly still. I could feel many eyes on the cart, but not in an unfriendly way. People like to watch something difficult done carefully. It reminds them that difficulty does not always mean danger. I lifted the blue band. The stone cart began to move. The wheels entered the bridge one at a time. The first wheel found the march track. The bridge gave a low note. The second wheel followed. The cart driver kept both hands steady, not pulling, not checking too hard. Heavy carts dislike nervous hands. The dwarf mason walked beside the near wheel, eyes lowered. I walked near the far wheel, staff angled downward, watching the road, the water, and the pace of the driver's shoulders. Step by step, the granite crossed the arch. Halfway over, the bridge tone deepened. I lowered the staff. The cart stopped. No one spoke. The water below pressed once against the stone. A slow breath moved under the bridge. The water giant had turned again, but gently this time, like a sleeper accepting a blanket. The dwarf mason kept one hand raised. The cart waited. The city waited. The goose, for once, waited. The bridge note softened. The mason lowered their hand. I raised the blue band again. The cart moved. When the rear wheel left the far side, the bridge gave a settling sigh through the soles of my boots. It was not complaint. It was completion. I lowered the gray flag. Sound returned by degrees. A wheel creak. A donkey breath. A covered bell knocking softly under cloth. Someone laughing quietly at something small and private. The old water under the bridge smoothed itself. The giant did not rise. The stone cart took its place beyond the herb wall, and the dwarf mason touched the side of the bridge once before moving on. I gathered the ground flags and tucked them under my arm. The main knot was gone now. There were still wagons to pass, still animals to guide, still the usual market impatiences waiting their turn, but the crossing had remembered its shape. One road in, one road over, one road out. I stood again on the center stone, city sash across my shoulder, traffic staff in hand, and felt the work become ordinary once more. That is the best kind of success at a crossing. Not applause. Not thanks shouted down the road. Only movement returning, soft and correct, as if the road had known how all along. Once the stone car had crossed, the old water bridge became easier to hear. Before that, the whole road had been speaking at once. Wheels, hooves, harness leather, anxious animals, warm bread, shaded bottles, feathers, granite, and the little bell that had started the trouble. Each had its own need. Each had pressed that need toward the narrow arch. Now the bridge had space around its thoughts. I stood with one hand on the parapet and felt the last heavy tremor fade into the ordinary stone hum. The canal below was dark again, moving in its slow green way. No large bubbles rose. No hidden shoulder pushed against the water. The sleeper beneath had turned back toward sleep. That was one part of the work done. Not all. A crossing is not finished when the largest cart passes. It is finished when the smaller impatiences stop growing in the spaces left behind. I reset the bridge flags. Blue at the center. White at the near side. Gray folded but close at hand. Then I opened the road in measured portions. The onion cart crossed first. Because its mule had become calm, and because onions are patient, but mule patience is a shorter matter, the driver kept the reins loose. The mule's ears flicked once toward the canal, then forward toward the market smell. The cart rolled over without argument. Next came the wool bundles, 2 orc shepherds walking beside them, hands resting lightly on the load ropes. The wool smelled of clean lanolin and hillside wind. A small lamb in a sling watched the bridge as if deciding whether stone was a type of weather. After that, the candlemakers crossed with their trays held level. Beeswax gave a warm, honey-thick scent under the morning sun. The bridge took their careful steps easily. The procession began to trust the road again. You can see that happen. Shoulders lower, hands open. Animals stop bracing before every sound. Drivers look forward instead of sideways. Children remember they are allowed to be curious, but not yet allowed to run. The goblin child stayed by the feather cart until it passed my post. The geese inside the crate were quiet in the way geese become quiet when they are planning future opinions. The felt cover remained on the returned bird's bell. I made a small mark on my slate to collect the cover later if the farmer forgot. City equipment wanders if no one writes it down. The feather cart crossed after the wool. The crate geese watched the canal through the slats. The bell made only one sleepy muffled sound when the wheel met the far edge of the bridge. Below, the water did not stir. Good. I gave the goblin child one small nod. They straightened as though knighted by the road itself. That was enough ceremony. The quiet harvest procession continued. There were carts of root bundles tied with straw, baskets of late plums, sacks of seed grain, a narrow cart of river salt, and a little hand wagon carrying clay jars of preserved herbs. A pair of elf orchard keepers moved in the shade whenever they could. Cloth screens angled over their fruit. A human cooper guided a barrel cart with felt wrapped around the rims. A dwarf apprentice led a pony loaded with measuring rods. 2 monks walked barefoot, their covered chime between them, not sounding. None of them needed much from me now. A lifted staff, a lowered palm, 2 fingers toward the center seam, a tap of the white band when a wheel drifted, a pause when the bridge tone became full. The road became a series of small permissions. Move. Wait. Ease left. Hold. Now. The market gate took the procession in by degrees. On the far side, market workers guided wagons into their proper lanes, herbs to the cool wall, bread to the covered tables, stone toward the well yard, wool toward the cloth hall, onions to the lower stalls, geese somewhere I hoped secure. The bridge stayed clear between groups. That mattered. A tired bridge does not mind work. It minds being treated as if it cannot tire. When the last of the heavier harvest carts had passed, I walked to the center of the arch and let my boots listen. The stone beneath me felt steady. Not young, never young, but steady in the way old things can be when respected. The dwarf mason waited on the far side until my staff lowered. Then they crossed back on foot and placed a palm on the parapet opposite mine. No long speech was needed. They listened. I listened. The bridge gave the same answer to both of us. Enough. I marked the slate. Heavy crossing completed, gray flag used, bridge rest advised before quarry traffic. The slate hung from my belt by a cord, scratched and smoothed by years of notes. Some officers kept cleaner records. Mine were serviceable. Roadwork rubs neatness off a person. The final carts of the quiet harvest were light ones. Flowers, empty crates, bundles of reed mats, a cart of small cheeses wrapped in leaves, children walking beside adults, a dog sleeping under a wagon despite the wheels, the voices, and the entire business of civic movement. By then, the road had almost forgotten the knot. That is another sign of success. No one tells the story of a crossing that ends well unless a goose is involved. I looked toward the feather cart as it disappeared into the market lane. The goblin child still walked near it, but slower now. Green flag returned, duty finished, pride folded carefully inside the chest. The goose's bell cover bobbed under its beak. I would retrieve it before the end of patrol. Probably. If the goose allowed, the water under the bridge gave one last soft bubble. Small, round, almost a sleeping sound. I leaned against the parapet and lowered my voice. Rest easy. That was the only thing I said for a while. The canal carried the words away or kept them under the arch. Either was acceptable. The old water bridge cooled by a shade as the sun moved behind the market roofs. Its carved side stones held marks from centuries of wheels, deep grooves from iron rims, shallow rubs from sledges, little chips where impatient drivers had once learned patience the hard way. Moss grew in one seam near the north edge. A family of bridge birds had tucked grass into a drain mouth and were watching me as if I were the disturbance. Perhaps I was. Traffic officers like to think we bring order, but sometimes we are only another large thing standing in the road, waving a painted stick and hoping the city understands. The city usually does. Not because of the stick, because most people, given clear enough signals and enough dignity, prefer not to make trouble for one another. The quiet harvest entered the market fully before the day began to lean toward afternoon. The holding square emptied, the waiting bay cleared, the herb wall smelled sharper where the medicine cart had been unloaded. Bread steam drifted from the covered tables. The stone cart's granite blocks had gone toward the well yard. The troll hauler sat on an overturned crate, drinking from a cup no larger than 2 of their fingers. The dwarf mason was already explaining something about bridge rest to a clerk who looked as if they wished bridges came with simpler opinions. I took down the gray flag and folded it properly. First lengthwise, then across, then into the square that fit the postbox. Tools last longer when put away as if they will be needed again. In roadwork, they always will. The red and blue flags stayed ready. The white band on my staff had collected dust. I wiped it with a sleeve until it showed clearly again. Mind the crossing. The phrase meant more after a knot. It meant mind the bridge. Mind the animal. Mind the shade. Mind the load. Mind the sleeper underneath. Mind the person behind you whose need is not louder than yours, only different. When the market road finally opened to ordinary traffic, it did so gently. A vegetable seller pushed an empty cart back toward the outer farms. 2 children carried a basket between them, each holding one handle with serious care. A scholar on a narrow mule asked the animal to proceed and received a long, thoughtful refusal. A fish seller rolled past with barrels packed in wet cloth, nodding at the bridge as if the bridge were an old neighbor. I resumed the usual pattern. Blue, red, white, wait, move, mind. The road no longer needed untangling. It only needed tending. For a crossing officer, that is enough. The day softened after the quiet harvest had fully entered the market. It did not become empty. A trade city rarely becomes empty while there is light enough to count coins, stack crates, or argue gently over the price of onions. But the road lost its tightness. The crossing breathed easier. Wagons no longer pressed toward the bridge in layered needs. They came one by one, or in pairs, each with space around it. That is when a patrol becomes almost invisible. I preferred those hours. Not because they were idle. Roads are never idle, but because the work returned to its smallest forms. A hand raised before a goat cart drifted too close to the parapet. A blue band lowered when a pair of apprentices carried a long plank across the road without looking. A white band turned toward a monk whose donkey had decided to stop exactly where the bridge crown began. The donkey reconsidered after a pause in a handful of dry grass from the monk's sleeve. No speeches were required. The city understood small signs. I retrieved the felt bell cover from the feather cart before the geese were taken into the lower market pen. The loose one had settled among the others, head tucked, as if it had not delayed half a procession and nearly disturbed the sleeper under the bridge. The goblin child stood nearby with both hands clasped behind their back, still watching over it though the task had ended. I took back the cover with a nod. The child returned the nod as solemnly as any officer at the high gate. Some duties last only a few minutes. They can still change the way someone stands. The felt cover went back into my belt pouch, a little damp from goose breath but serviceable. I made another mark on my slate. Small bell cover returned, washed before next use. The slate was nearly full by then. Medicine cart shaded, bread cart crossed, goose recovered, gray flag used, heavy loads spaced, bridge rest advised. None of the marks would look grand to the clerk who copied them later. That was fine. Most of a city's safety looks dull once written down. Dull records mean the trouble did not become larger. I walked the old water bridge again, heel to toe. Slowly, the stones had cooled under the afternoon shade. The grooves in the wheel tracks held a little dust. The parapet was warm where hands had rested. At the center of the arch, I stopped and let my boots listen. The bridge answered steady. Below, the canal moved without complaint. The water giant did not show itself. There was no gray eye in the dark, no hand rising from the green water, no dramatic sign that the city had been spared. Only one lazy bubble near the far wall, then a smoothness where the current folded over it. That was enough. I placed my palm on the parapet. Old stone has a way of taking heat from the hand without seeming greedy. I stood there until my own breathing matched the slow rhythm under the bridge. A fish seller crossed behind me with empty barrels. A pair of human children rolled a hoop along the outer road. A dwarf apprentice carried measuring rods over one shoulder. 2 elf healers passed on foot, their bottles already delivered and their cart folded down to a narrow frame. A troll hauler slept in the shade of a market awning, cup balanced on their knee. A goblin peddler mended a cart hinge with such concentration that the hinge seemed embarrassed by its own failure. Many kinds of people. One road. That was the part outsiders missed when they asked whether the city was difficult to manage. Of course it was difficult. Everything alive is difficult in some way. Horses startle, carts lean, bread cools, medicine warms, stone tires, children chase birds, geese hold opinions, giants sleep under bridges. Travelers misunderstand one another's pace. Strong folk forget that not everyone turns quickly. Quick folk forget that not everyone can stop at once. The work was not to make everyone the same. The work was to give each difference enough room to pass without breaking the road. Near the end of my patrol, the dwarf mason returned to the near side and left a small chalk mark on the bridge post. It meant the bridge should take only light quarry traffic until the next inspection. I added my own mark below it, smaller but in the same hand of city work. Gray flag used. Sleeper settled. The chalk looked pale against the dark post. Useful. Temporary. Like most instructions. The market gate began its evening change. Incoming carts thinned. Outgoing carts grew more common. Empty baskets returned to farms. Full coin purses were tied under tunics. Tired animals leaned into harness. The herb sellers took down bundles from the sunward wall. The bread tables folded their cloths. The well yard rang once with a careful mallet, then went quiet. I put the signal flags away one by one. Gray folded into its square. White rolled around its dowel. Blue left hanging until the last cart passed. Red kept in my hand until the road was clear enough for mistakes. The painted staff felt smooth from the day's grip. Red, blue, white, wait, move, mind. A small set of colors for a city with more needs than colors could ever hold. The last crossing of my patrol was a simple one. A small handcart of leftover turnips, a tired mule, and a lantern carrier walking beside it. The mule paused at the bridge mouth and lowered its head toward the stone as if listening. I waited with it. The driver waited too. No one complained. After a moment, the mule stepped forward and crossed without trouble. Some animals understand old bridges better than we do. When the cart cleared the far side, I lowered the blue band for the final time that day. The road settled. The canal darkened. The market lamps began to appear one by one. I stood alone for a little while at the center stone. Not completely alone. A city is never that. There were footsteps behind walls, dishes in taverns, wheels in distant alleys, pigeons under the eaves, barges moving beyond the canal bend, and the great sleeping presence beneath the arch. But the crossing itself was quiet. I thought of the day's knot, the medicine bottles, the bread steam, the troll cart, the granite blocks, the goose bell, the goblin child holding the little green flag, as if the whole city depended on it. In a way, it had. Cities are held together by such things, not only by walls, charters, guards, towers, or king seals, also by covered bells, shaded bottles, patient bridges, and people willing to wait because someone has shown them why. I touched the bridge once more before leaving. The stone gave back no words. Only steadiness. That was the answer I wanted. I returned the staff to the market gate rack, unpinned the city sash from my shoulder, and brushed dust from the green edge. Tomorrow, Another officer would wear it, or I would. Another cart would lean. Another animal would decide the road was made for its private thinking. Another traveler would need shade, or space, or time. That was not discouraging. That was the city continuing. As I left the post, the canal under the old bridge made one soft sound. Not a warning. Not a complaint. A sleeper turning comfortably beneath a blanket of stone. I took it as approval, though officially the city does not record the opinions of water giants. It probably should. Marlowe here again. I like the quiet scale of this account. No battle, no royal decree, no great disaster avoided in a way anyone would carve into a gate. Only a crossing officer, an old bridge, many kinds of travelers, and a day made easier because each need was noticed before it became too sharp. There is comfort, I think, in a road being tended well. If there is a world you have wondered about, a place you have imagined, or a quiet corner of another universe you would like us to look into, you may leave it in the comments. Marlowe has a strange habit of gently opening doors we did not even know existed. Until next time, this has been Marlowe's Evening Radio. May your crossings be gentle, your bells softly covered, and the road ahead patient beneath your feet.